What's up guys, and welcome back to On The Brick with another custom LEGO review. Today I have for you one of the very first builds I ever bought from Brickvault, and this is their Rebellion Micro Fleet. Yeah, buying the instructions for this does come with the Imperial side as well, but to be completely honest with you, I just wasn't really interested in building a bunch of similar looking TIE fighters. So today we are only going to be looking at the Rebellion side, and unfortunately that does not include either the Ghost or the Falcon. Those are separate builds that will get a video of their own one day. There are 7 different ships included in the instructions. That is the Uwing, the Y-Wing, the X-Wing, the B-Wing, 2 versions for the A-Wing, and a Snowspeeder. I obviously didn't build the Snowspeeder, and the only reason for that is because Brickvault said that it wasn't really to scale to the rest of this fleet, so I just didn't bother. Anyway, let's get a closer look at these vehicles. First up is the Uwing, which is probably my favorite of all the builds included. This contains 60 pieces and only costs about $5 plus shipping to get the pieces from Bricklink. This build is actually rather sturdy and in my opinion looks the most like any of the vehicles in question. And yes, you can even open the wings. They do fully open and it's actually rather stable to do so. It's an incredibly smooth process and one that I'm sure you can figure out. The only problem that I had with building the U-Wing is that underneath, when you start building it, you actually have 2 different sections that aren't joined together for almost the entire build. Like I said, it's only 60 pieces, so it's not like you're sitting here for hours wondering what's going to go on. I mean, it took maybe 5 minutes to put this thing together. And one thing I do need to mention is that since I purchased and built these, Brickvault did update this and sent out the update quite recently. So it's entirely possible that that was fixed. I did try to take a look through all the instructions and part list and everything, and I didn't really notice anything big. But even if it wasn't changed, again, it's not that serious of an issue at all. The U-Wing is of course capable of staying on the stand, to which you do get the instructions for as well. And I think while it's up here, you can kind of see just how bulky it actually is. However, you can also open the wings and it will still be balanced. You might have to be a little bit more careful with it, but it is very easy to make work. Up next is the A-Wing, and I'm going to go ahead and say here that for every vehicle except the U-Wing, I went ahead and took the option of building all 5. The instructions do come with the part lists for individual builds, but they also come with squadron part lists that are 5 of the builds. For something like the A-Wing, it's literally just every piece multiplied by 5, but for the X-Wing and the Y-Wing, there are minor differences. The second thing I need to say about this A-Wing is that this is the alternative version. In all honesty, I got this version by accident. I don't really know how I did that. Look, I bought and built these over 2.5 years ago, but I'm actually happy that I got this version anyway. Out of the 5 A-Wings that I built, this one does show you part of the problem with building at this small scale. You can probably tell that there are some gaps in the pieces there, and I believe that is why this white curved slope has a giant crack in the front. All of these builds have been sitting on a shelf on display for the last 2.5 years. I have not played with them or anything like that, so this literally just cracked from the stress caused by the build. And that is a little disappointing to see. Now, while we have the A-Wing here though, I do like how the rest of this looks. This is another one that I think they captured very well. I love the back fins, the cockpit, the side guns. They did a really good job with this one. It's a very sturdy build as well, even though the side pieces are only connected by a single stud. For comparison, here is how this build should look. And you'll notice that the gaps are now between the sides and the middle. And honestly, this doesn't really look that good. And so that's the trade-off with something this small. Either you can make it not look good but keep your pieces safe, or you can make it look slightly more accurate and take the risk of breaking your pieces. And what's really funny is that I built this version of the A-Wing because the other one uses an illegal technique that I didn't want to do because I didn't want to stress and break pieces. Now, obviously the A-Wing can very comfortably sit on the stand. It's a lot easier to balance this one, and you don't really need to worry about it. It will look perfectly fine. Next up is the X-Wing, and I'm just going to be honest with you, I don't like this build. I don't think it looks good. I am actually quite disappointed with how this came out, and look, I know that building at this scale is an incredibly difficult thing to do. When building so small, you're either going to sacrifice stability or accuracy, and sometimes you have to resort to techniques that you wouldn't otherwise use, which, as I'm sure you can tell, there are several questionable techniques in this build. Now, I'm not one to say that illegal techniques ruin LEGO or anything like that. A lot of mocks require them, but I know some people don't like them. Also, one thing I wanted to point out, if you haven't been able to tell already, is that the astromechs are different colors. That is built into the parts list. Now, this build doesn't necessarily look horrible, I am just very underwhelmed with it. While not necessarily unstable, it's not super stable either. And a lot of that has to do with the wings or the S-foils, whatever they're called, because of how they are connected. One problem that I have with the wings though is that you can't actually properly close them. In fact, this is an uninterrupted shot of me attempting to do so. I have sped it up a bit just because this video is going kind of long, but you can see the struggles of me just trying to put the wings in an even and flat position. And when I say flat, I mean relatively flat, because these clips that act as the guns obviously prevent that from happening. If you know Brickvault's micro builds, then you've probably noticed that I'm missing some pieces on these X-wings, and that's because no matter what I did, I wasn't able to get it to work. Brickvault's instructions include bush pieces to act as the front of the engines, right in front of where the wings go. Now, getting them on is actually not that hard, but I wasn't able to get them on and the wings at the same time. I think, again, it's been 2.5 years, but the bush pieces did interfere with something, and I do remember that every time I tried to open and close the wings, they would just pop off anyway. So in the end, I just found it better to not include them and not worry about it. It really doesn't make that big of a difference in the end. The X-wing also does look nice on the stand though, I will give them that. Then there is the Y-wing, and honestly there's not too much to say about this one. If you know anything about me, and if you watch this channel for any length of time, then you know that the Y-wing is my favorite Star Wars ship. I do think this looks about as good as they could have made it look, even if it is a little plain for a Y-wing, but I do like it. Just like the X-wing, you can tell that there are different colors for the astromechs though, and it is a relatively stable build. They do kind of awkwardly ask you to use rubber bands for the coloring details up here, and this is just one of many reasons why when Brickvault say things like they check builds for part availability, I struggle to believe that. And yes, I know this particular build is over 2.5 years old, but several of their newer builds have the same issue. Also, this rubber band really limits the color choices you can make for this Y-wing. If you wanted it to be any other color, you'd have to get your own, which honestly isn't really that hard to do. Also, you don't even need to get the rubber bands, you can just leave them off entirely and it's fine. The one actual structural issue with this build is that sometimes the engines pop off. Sometimes. Not every time, and it's not a common thing. You can see here that one side popped off, the other side just doesn't even want to pop off. So just make sure that when you grab this, you're doing so from the front and you're not being too aggressive with it. And lastly, we get to the B-wing, which is by far the absolute worst of the builds. Like, sure, I guess you can tell that it's the B-wing, but boy do I have some problems with this. First, this thing is just ugly. It doesn't even look good. I'm sorry, and again, I know all the problems of trying to build at a micro scale, but it does not look good. There's a lot of gaps in the build here, unfortunately, and there's not really any way to change that. This build is incredibly fragile, and that makes it hard to align and look good. Yes, you can raise and lower the wings if you so want, just be careful doing so, because it's really that easy for this thing to fall apart. Seriously, every time I've had to move these, they have fallen apart on me. And again, that's because they are being built at such a small scale, and so the connections can't really be super strong, otherwise this thing would look even worse and nothing like the B-wing at all. Also, I didn't really think that these clips on the wings are under any stress, but one of them here has no more tension and just pops off incredibly easily. I didn't check all of my B-wings because I didn't want to move any of them, but this particular one did have that issue. I'm actually really interested in getting One Case's micro fleet. He's built all the same vehicles, including the B-wing, and honestly I think his B-wing looks a lot better. but I also know that he has a lot of very unstable builds. So maybe I'll get his and do a comparison. Now, I do need to admit that the B-Wing does look fine on the stand, and in fact, when you look at it from the side, is the best angle that you can have of it. Speaking of the stand though, I did want to mention that this entire time I have been using a slightly modified version of the one Brickvault includes. The build they have in the instructions is meant for 5 vehicles to be put together, hence why you can buy 5 in a squad, or you can put all 5 minus the snowspeeder on there. Originally, I planned to have this in a more dynamic setup than just sitting on a shelf, so I modified their stand to be able to hold individual fighters. It's exactly the same build, it's just smaller. And honestly, it works great. Their design is amazing and it's actually really cool. So even if the build is a little unstable like the X-Wing or the B-Wing, if you have it on the stand, it'll be perfectly fine. But as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, is this something that you would want to see on my store? I currently don't really have any micro builds on my store, but I was wondering if people would be interested, especially since they would be cheaper. Also, please do remember to like and subscribe if you liked what you saw, and maybe consider joining me on Patreon. You can sign up for as low as $1 a month and go a long way towards helping continue this channel, or at higher tiers you can see your name on screen or even get shoutouts like Jonathan and Project Elements. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.